right, we'll resume and complete today this discussion of absorption from concentrated vapor. We had seen that with the realistic situation of concentrated vapors, it won't be possible for us to neglect the variation in the gas and liquid molar fluxes. So, we will have to account for the variation of the total molar fluxes of gas and liquid in terms of the components which do not vary. In gas, it is the insoluble gas, sometimes termed as inert, but is better described as insoluble, and in the liquid the component which does not vary is the solvent, and we presume the solvent is having negligible vapor pressure or it is non-volatile. So, in terms of the molar fluxes of the insoluble component in the gas phase and the non-volatile solvent in the liquid G0 and L0, we could write the absorption dependent or changing mole fraction dependent molar fluxes of gas and liquid by these equations. G is equal to G0 into 1 by 1 minus y and L equal to L0 into 1 by 1 minus x, where y and x are mole fractions of the solute in the gas and liquid. We see this from the proportionality that if y is the soluble component in the gas phase, 1 minus y must be the insoluble component, and for 1 minus y insoluble, total will be 1. Therefore, for G0 the constant or non-varying molar flux of the insoluble gas G0, the total ought to be greater than G0. So, G is equal to G0 divided by this fraction 1 minus y smaller than 1. Similarly, the liquid comprises the solution, that is the solvent plus the solute together. Solute is not any more negligible. So, for 1 minus x of the solvent, 1 is the total. So, for L0 molar flux of the solvent, non-volatile solvent, the total molar flux of the solution should be larger than L0. So, L0 by 1 minus x, that is L, and we know that we would be accounting for variation of y and x with z. So, this will permit us to account for the variation of G and L, the two molar fluxes with the distance measured from the bottom, that is z. Once we plug this in, this total mass balance, that is taking the solute in the gas and liquid as it comes in and goes out, we should be able to get an equation which upon cancellation of z would give you the differential equation for the operating line. This is statement of material balance. So, we plug this in, this pair of equations we plug in here for G and L, complete the differentiation followed by the integration, and this is what you get. This was the point I suppose we stopped at last time. Could you verify this? Did you have enough time to verify this? Okay. And as I said, we have gotten rid of z. So, this is going to be description of how y would vary with x in the column at all possible locations. And since it is a statement of material balance, description of the operating conditions, therefore, we call it operating line. And surely the concentrated vapor system is something which is more general compared to the dilute vapor system. If only we could presume that Y0 is not significant, it would be reducing to the dilute vapor case. So, we see that if Y0, the inlet gas composition, if it is lean in the solute component, then everything else has to be small. If Y0 is small compared to 1, then Y everywhere will be smaller than Y0, even closer to 0 or further away from 1. Similarly, the maximum solute mole fraction that can be as a result of absorption in the liquid, that also will be limited because we do not put enough gas into the column. The solute is limited in quantity. So, maximum liquid phase mole fraction possible x0 also will be small compared to 1, and that means if we start with pure solvent at the top and we will never even consider anything exceeding x0 if it is an absorption, then it means that x also has to be small all through compared to 1. So, wherever we have this 1 compared with y's or x's, we can neglect those, which means basically everything corresponding to small y 0 will be neglected in comparison to 1. So, we will have y equal to y 0 plus L 0 by G 0 x minus x 0, and then whole thing is negligible compared to 1, and that is exactly the operating line for the dilute vapor case. But please remember that this by its very nature is a nonlinear function. So, if we were to plot y versus x, we will in the concentrated vapor case will only obtain a curve like this. So, that is a statement of operating conditions, operating line, and since we are talking of concentrated vapors, which means significant amount of solute can enter the solvent and create this solution, and if the solubility also is not very small, then we can't expect Henry's law also to be applicable. And in most cases we will have this y star versus x, all the equilibrium data either given in a tabular form. So, for different x values we will get y star values in the form of table, or we might have been given this curve directly y star versus x. So, the equilibrium relationship is also likely to be nonlinear. So, generically we could represent the operating conditions and equilibrium conditions on one plot or a phase portrait space, and as I argued last time, the differences between the y values corresponding to any particular x value will be in a sense a measure of the driving force. How much is present, how much can be at best minimized. So, the differences between these two curves along lines parallel to y axis will be the measure of the driving force. Okay. We might need these differences in order to integrate an equation of this kind if it were not possible to integrate it analytically. We should be able to do this because once we know several of these y minus y star values, we take reciprocals and then plot on a new ordinate reciprocal of y minus y star versus y, and then area under that curve is graphically the integral between these values y0 and yl, right. And this was only to demonstrate that we could follow similar method for obtaining integrals in case of concentrated vapor case, where we have no analytical relationship available for y star as a function of y star is function of x, and therefore, even if we make use of the operating line, we would not be able to obtain y star as a function of y analytically. So, we will be forced to do this integration either graphically or numerically using some kind of integration routine, subroutine, or you could use Simpson's rule, your own code you could write, or you could use for more accurate estimates the quadrature formulae. Anyway, that is a method. So, we will go ahead with this now. We are symbolically writing y star is a function of x. We do not know what that function is. Okay. You might argue that it is possible that if we have values of y star versus x, we could fit an equation, maybe using Microsoft Excel with appropriate acceptable R square. Well, one could do that, but the point is not about integration or your ability to integrate. The point is something different, and it is a bit historical, but still relevant to the practice, and that is what I want to come to shortly. So, ignoring those details of integration, let us accept that it is possible to integrate in some way to whatever desired accuracy, fine. So, now let us focus on obtaining the last key equation. Remember, equilibrium relation is not available, data on equilibrium are given to us. That is one equation of the 3 you require. The equation which is total solute mole balance written on gas and liquid together on a differential height delta z, which gives you after integration operating line, that is our basis for obtaining the second key equation. And the third key equation, if you recall, is the solute mole balance only on the gas phase or only on the liquid phase, whatever you choose. If you choose to work with only gas phase, then we should be talking in terms of the overall gas phase transfer coefficient, gas phase mass transfer coefficient, which I explained at length last time. If you choose to work in terms of liquid, then you should be talking of overall liquid phase mass transfer coefficient obtained similarly, considering the resistances to be in series and total is equal to sum of resistance within the gas phase and within the liquid phase, right? And the third key equation we obtain therefore by making this balance on gas phase alone, and this will come from the net input gy at z with gas minus the output gy at z plus delta z from the same gas phase compartment, which will give you this part of the equation. And then there is a loss across the interface, which will be given by this kg AC y minus y star, or in the primitive terms it would be kg A times capital A delta z into C1 minus C1 star. It's after we divide by A delta z, this is what would be left. There is a little visualization which I think I should show to you so that this concept is very clear in your mind. Let me draw that. Let us say the section between Z and Z plus delta Z of the packed bed is visualized as these two compartments. We are focusing on where action is. The packing has no role here now as far as this visualization is concerned, except providing whatever the area, interfacial area, small a specific area times this volume delta z, except providing this total area, packing has no role to play. Our solute cannot enter the packing and nothing from within the packing can enter the gas phase. So, we focus only on gas and liquid. So, the two balances we were talking about, they correspond to gas entering at Z and leaving at Z plus delta Z, and the other one is with liquid entering at Z plus delta Z and leaving at Z. So, the equation corresponding to total solute present in this volume A delta Z takes into account this and this together. These two compartments are taken together as the two phases present in this volume A delta Z, where the gas is losing solute and liquid is gaining solute. So, when you do that, you get the operating line. Okay. The third equation we obtain focuses only on G, input at Z, output, and the loss across this interface to the liquid. That is our third, this term, second term. Clear? I thought I should explain it this way because it will make it easier for you to understand the more complex problem that we will deal with, a real life problem we will deal with shortly. So, if this is clear, then in passing we have noted a possible powerful approach and extension of the elementary volume approach that you come across in transport phenomena for more detailed analysis of practical columns, practical equipment. Okay. If this is all clear, would you want to verify this, or you are able to do it mentally. So, this is clear now. So, we substitute for g again from here g0 upon 1 minus y and write this as minus g0, that is a constant, we pull it out, that is the insoluble component's molar flux, and then we have d by dz of y by 1 minus y. So, that gives you 1 minus y to the power minus 2 minus dy. So, we take care of minus 1 minus y to the power minus 2 and then 1 minus coming from here dy. So, ultimately it turns out that this sign remains unchanged. We have now g0 by 1 minus y square dy by dz. Okay. Now, put down your pen to paper and separate the variables and try and integrate. You will have the same difficulty as earlier, but at least write the expression for the height of the tower. What will be the height of tower L now? Small c is the total molar concentration. Okay. Let me go one step further. This entire operation we are presuming is at constant pressure, which is atmospheric. Okay. So, the total molar concentration will be simply total pressure P by RT. In this case, it will be atmospheric pressure by RT. Okay. That is a constant. So, separate the variables and integrate. If you can do it in your mind, there is no gas bubble actually here. Now, we have the packing and we have these interstitial spaces, right. The gas is flowing through the interstitial spaces which are connected. The height of the tower will be integral 0 to L small l dz, and that could be written in terms of an integral and certain quotient. So, the height of tower should come out to be the following: g0 by kg AC and integral from yl to y0 dy by 1 minus y bracket squared into y minus y star. If we once again try to see the limiting form of this for dilute vapor, for small y0, this y will be small compared to 1. So, 1 minus y square will be 1, approximately 1. So, the height of the tower for concentrated vapor system also reduces to that for the dilute vapor case. Unlike earlier, we can't do this integration analytically. That was the point I was making. Y star is given as a function of x and therefore y through operating line only in a numerical form, either as numbers or as a graph. So, we will have to integrate this either graphically or numerically. Okay. Now, let us invoke our reference to dimensions once again. Look at the right hand side and tell me something about the dimensions. Left hand side of course is meters. What will be? Should be obviously length to length. The quotient has to be length because the integral is dimensionless. We have y on top which is dimensionless, everything underneath is also dimensionless, mole fractions, right. So, the integral is a number without dimensions. You agree with that? G0 by kg AC, does it have dimensions of length? Unless we have made some error, it has to be. Check it once. One quick way to agree will be, since we wrote this on dimensional considerations, the units of kg AC must be same as units of G. So, this of course has to be units of this will have to be units of G by Z. Okay. So, G by this will have to have units of Z, which is meters, right. You can put it down. Now, we come to something interesting here. We just plug in the dimensions of individual components. Okay. Now, people practicing chemical engineers have considered always the height as made of this one part which is named and this second part in multiplication which is also named, and those names are here. G0 by kg AC is called height of transfer unit because it has the units of height, and the integral which is just a number, pure number, is called number of transfer units, and the product of height of transfer units and number of transfer units HTU and NTU is the height of the tower. Okay. Now, you could think about this little bit more. What would this depend on? We'll take the harder part. if we think of this number which is NTU, number of transfer units, what would it depend on from the overall practice point of view? And anything else? Because equilibrium, we have that part. And the equilibrium information will be specific to a given gas liquid system, isn't it? So we know that these gas liquid systems will vary in the degree of difficulty of separation. The more soluble solutes would be easier to remove. The sparingly soluble solutes will be harder to remove. Okay. So the number of transfer unit, this quantity would depend, so to say, on the degree of difficulty of separation. Inspect the first part, HTU, the height of transfer unit. What would it depend on? Properties. What else? If I draw your attention to one focus, equipment, what would it depend on? Don't name the components. Talking about equipment, now let me focus your attention on one specific aspect, and that is efficiency. You understand efficiency of anything, right? So from the perspective of efficiency, what can you perceive about HTU? Let me put it this way. I am preempting the next slides. If your pack tower is very efficient, then what would it mean compared to an inefficient pack tower when we look at the HTU values? So for an efficient pack tower, which may depend on the equipment features including the area, we will have a small height of transfer unit. KGA, that's in particular the focus, which in terms of operation will mean you have that area and the existing aerodynamics, all that will be translated into an efficient pack tower leading to small height of transfer units. If HTU is small, for the same gas liquid system, L will also be small. So more efficient pack tower means will require a smaller column, right? So HTU is a measure of the efficiency of equipment. If for the same equipment we took a system which is harder to separate, then that would mean NTU will be large and then height of tower will be large. So these are the notions which are in the minds of practicing chemical engineer. People first, given the task of absorption, would calculate HTU and NTU, very easy to calculate for any system, and then from there they will know what is the nature of the absorption system we are designing and what kind of efficiency we should aim at. Okay. That's the reason that we need to look at this as the product of these two terms, not because they are harder to evaluate. Nothing is hard to evaluate or compute these days, but still this anachronism, something which will look arcane, is still the central portion of every chemical engineer's thinking involved in gas absorption. Okay, because HTU simply is a way to compare different equipments, different packings and so on, and NTU tells us how to compare one system against another in terms of degree of difficulty of separation. Okay, so that is a physical insight reading into the height of tower in detail. Now there are few things that I need to explain to you. We have certain conceptual approximations. We are dealing with systems which are not exactly in equilibrium, but they are near equilibrium systems, and we treat them in terms of equilibrium terms. And the integration is straightforward but limited by these two key assumptions. One, there is absorption of a single solute vapor into a non-volatile solvent, and the gas is insoluble in the sense, the other gas is insoluble in the sense that very little of it will actually dissolve into the liquid, and negligible vapor pressure will be perceived of the liquid in the gas phase. Because of these approximations, we have the powers like 1 minus y to the power minus 2 or minus 1 appearing in our analysis. The second approximation you should understand is the use of mass transfer coefficient itself for concentrated vapor system is approximate. Actually, the flux would be given by a series of terms like this, kg delta C1, kg prime delta C1 square, etc. And we simply have neglected the higher order terms, delta C square and higher order terms, we have simply neglected and took this approximation which should be true only for dilute vapor case. So, that is one more approximation that one has to note. Mass transfer coefficients therefore are not accurate. In practice, they may be affected by convection induced by mass transfer itself. That concept is not new to you. We have talked about it at length when we are describing the master equation of mass transfer, where the fluxes were related to the end mole fractions, right. Actually, in practice, the engineers would rely on measured mass transfer coefficients. Nobody will rely on predictions even if are available. Measurements would be relied upon. Okay. Now, I have to make a decision. Are you studying humidification and dehumidification in some other course right now? You are not. So, it is possible that the topics related to humidification and dehumidification will come in another course, and here I would like to keep a logical consistency of what we are doing here on gas absorption further. And I have told you that we would look at something novel, both as a tool for demonstrating the art of mathematical modeling and also to bring you right up to the state of the art. So, for a while I would go away from the slides and start explaining things to you in words and maybe some diagrams. I need you to visualize. We are starting a totally new topic now. Okay. It also fills in a certain gap in terms of the Laplace transform inversion I talked of some time back, and I allowed you to keep that later part of assignment incomplete because I knew I would come to this point sometime in the lectures. Okay. Now, let me ask you this question. Building upon the insight we have gained on Pactover for gas absorption, and let us say from this viewpoint that we want to increase the interfacial area between gas and liquid, do you see any scope for doing it, given the option even of walking away from Pactovers? In a classroom, you are free to imagine. I am giving you this new degree of freedom. I said you know what a Pactover is. Say tomorrow as a practicing engineer, you were to imagine situation like this. The challenge is to try and at least double the interfacial area, and you could walk away from Pactovers. The question is there any way you can perceive one could do this? Okay. You are reluctant to go away from Pactovers. You want to increase the area by increasing the area of the packing, by making the packing porous or whatever. But I am asking you to be little more bold. You can walk away completely from Pactovers. I will give you one more clue. Oh, liquid, that is spray column. You can increase the area surely. So, that is one, that is how you make the milk powder. Spray drying is used to dry milk into milk powder. Atomization, increase of area, that is what we do. But I am deliberately giving you certain amount of freedom and leading you into a particular channel. I said that you have freedom to walk away from Pactover, but the problem is more like a geometrical visualization. You want just to double the area, approximately double the area. How would you do? If you can't think of practical situation, it's fine. We'll come to that. Take it as a geometrical problem. You want to approximately double the area, and you don't worry about how you would do it. I'm not going to ask you to do it. Geometrically, I want to approximately double the area. What can I do? Whether you can do it or not is another question, but just tell me from your mathematical cap what comes to your mind. We require a little magic here, and sometimes certain magic is necessary. Imagine, this is pedagogical example. Imagine that you have Pactover. Let's say for the sake of simplicity you have spherical packings. the liquid flows over the packing, gas goes between the packings and the liquid films in the interstitial space. That is a traditional packed tower. Geometrically, if we want to double the area, perhaps what we should do is, we should perform this magic, ask the spherical packings to vanish and instead fill it up with gas, same gas. You understand what I am saying? If I have the packing, take a sphere, on the sphere I have liquid flowing down in case of actual packing. What I am saying is, around this liquid film there is gas in the packed tower. What I am saying is, this magical step is make the sphere vanish, so you have empty space now, void there, fill that void with the gas that you want to contact liquid with. Now you have gas on the outside of this spherical shell and there is gas on the inside of this spherical shell, and the spherical shell is made of liquid itself. Okay. This would be a way to geometrically arrive at this conclusion, that simply by making the solid replaced by gas, we would be able to increase the area to almost double the value. Okay. Now let us come to the nitty gritty. In practice, can we do this? No. There are lots of magics we can perform quite easily. So don't say no. Never say no. Okay. Let me draw your attention to probably a vanishing art these days, but I am certain all of you have done it sometime or other. You have washed your clothes. You use soap or detergents. That's it. Soap bubbles. Soap bubbles have gas inside and gas outside. Okay. So there you come to a column where potentially we can have the area doubled. You will have to have a column filled up with soap bubbles. Making soap bubbles is not difficult. All of you have blown soap bubbles. Some of us continue to blow bubbles even at a ripe age. Incidentally, imagine that you have put lots of these soap bubbles in a column. Remove the packings. That tall cylindrical column is now filled up with soap bubbles. You have almost double the area. Probably it will not be practical to blow bubbles with a ring and soap solution. Rather, in practice you might want to generate foam by continuously sparging the gas or air through a soap solution or surfactant solution. Okay. So the column now you come to realize is this foam column. You have a column, at the bottom of it there is a distributor plate, which is nothing but a plate with several holes with some predefined triangular pitch. So there is a plate with the holes here. You blow gas from here using a blower. So gas enters at the bottom, leaves at the top. And when gas is passing through the column, you introduce liquid into this column here and liquid may go out. So liquid comes in here, goes out here, gas comes in here and goes out here. If this liquid contains soap or surfactant or a detergent, active component of detergent is a surfactant, as soon as these bubbles form and rise through this short height of the surfactant solution, it will form foam, which will layer by layer rise right up to certain height, which is the top of the column, and this is all filled up with foam now. And after reaching certain height, if you have adjusted the surfactant concentration, these foam bubbles will break on their own. You might ask the question, why would the foam bubbles break? Think of it. Take a given foam bubble at the bottom, which has just come out of this storage section, which we call of the liquid. As soon as it comes out of here, because of surfactant, it gets stabilized, a foam bubble forms, which is not easy to break, and it has certain amount of liquid content associated with it. So you can fill up the foam column this way in the same practical sense as you would treat a gas and liquid in a packed tower. This would answer the question which I raised before you earlier. If you were to pack the entire column by soap bubbles, each one is say identical size, spherical, they are all packed together, put from the top, how would they appear to you? Pressure is atmospheric. It might appear as if at the first sight it will be just collection of these spheres together, but it turns out when you have large number of these bubbles together, they tend to deform a bit, okay, because these bubbles are flexible, unlike the packings, solid packings. So they start deforming and they attain a polyhedral shape. Now I would want you to watch closely the bubbles you make when you wash your clothes. You would see potentially two kinds of scenarios. One in which the bubbles are small and they are spherical. If the bubbles are large, they tend to get deformed. So the small bubbles which are spherical and they are also associated with larger liquid content, or we will call it liquid holdup, they are usually called froth. In practice, froth is associated with froth flotation and therefore some kind of particulate residue left behind after this dispersion breaks. And foam is usually larger bubbles, polyhedral bubbles, and they don't leave any particulate residue normally upon collapse. Okay. So we will distinguish between these two dispersions, froth generally as spherical bubbles, larger liquid content, let us not worry about the particles, foam bubbles as polyhedral bubbles, larger bubbles and less liquid content. Okay. What I have shown here is a more complicated or complex problem of these distorted polyhedral bubbles. Okay. One last thing I want to leave you with, and I will resume from here. What would be the shape of these polyhedral bubbles? How would the polyhedral bubbles appear? They are not spherical, that much is certain. They are not even slightly distorted spheres. Kind of, you would see these foam bubbles are polyhedral, they have flat liquid films, more or less flat liquid films, the shape and number of which would vary. Now imagine if I give you a 3-meter tall foam column, you would have millions of these bubbles varying in shape and size, each face with different numbers of sides. How would I hope to predict how much gas will be absorbed in a column like this with similar confidence as, let us say, for a packed tower? It would at once appear to you, and that is the thought I want to leave with you, it will appear to you that we are up against an intractable problem, which is true. Rigorously speaking, exact solution to this problem will be impossible, practically impossible. However, we would be interested in obtaining an engineering solution. If we could predict the performance of this reactor within, let us say, plus minus 10%, it would be pretty good. So that's the task we will start with next time. Stop here.